Hello viewers, welcome to Wenyeji TV. Today we want to start off from East Africa, where we'll move all the way to the Pearl of Africa and talk about East Africa's strongman, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. Yoweri Kaguta Museveni has ruled Uganda for 36 years. The 79-year-old has ruled Uganda since 1986. Many people see him as a savior for Uganda after a long protracted civil wars. Others see him as a dictator. What do you think about this great man from East Africa? Join me, JW, on a journey as we explore a brief history of this strongman of East Africa. This is Wenyeji TV, and let us meet at the end of this journey and compare notes.
Here at Wenyeji TV, we are dedicated to bringing you in-depth coverage of the latest news, events, and stories from around the world. Our team of passionate journalists, reporters, and documentary filmmakers work tirelessly to provide you with accurate, unbiased, and thought-provoking content.
Hello to all our viewers, we are back on air after a well-deserved break. Thanks for tuning to Wenyeji TV. Today we focus on the Ugandan President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. Many have saluted him for bringing order in Uganda, yet others call him a dictator. Who is right in these opinions? Here is a brief summary of the life and career of Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, the President of Uganda. You are watching Wenyeji TV, a program produced and directed by JW. Museveni was born on the 15th of September 1944 in Rukunjiri, a district in southwestern Uganda, to Amos Kaguta and Esteri Kokundekanganzi, who were cattle keepers. He is an ethnic Hema of the Kingdom of Mpororo, now part of Ankole. He attended missionary schools and later studied political science and economics at the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, where he became involved in leftist politics and African liberation movements. He returned to Uganda in 1970 and joined the intelligence service of President Milton Obote, but fled to Tanzania after Idi Amin seized power in 1971. He founded the Front for National Salvation, FRENASA, a rebel group that fought alongside Tanzanian forces to oust Amin in 1979. He contested the 1980 presidential election as the leader of the Uganda Patriotic Movement, UPM, but lost to Obote, who had returned from exile. He claimed that the election was rigged and launched a guerrilla war against Obote's government with his National Resistance Army, NRA. He waged a 5-year bush war that claimed over 100,000 lives and ended with his capture of Kampala, the capital city, on the 26th of January, 1986. He declared himself president and formed the National Resistance Movement, NRM, as his political party. He stabilized the country and restored economic growth, implementing capitalist reforms and supporting a free press. He also intervened in regional conflicts, such as the Rwandan Civil War, the First and Second Congo Wars, and the Sudanese Civil War. He faced a brutal insurgency by the Lord's Resistance Army, LRA, in northern Uganda, which displaced millions of people and committed atrocities against civilians. He abolished term limits for the presidency in 2005 and age limits in 2017, allowing him to run for re-election indefinitely. He has won 6 consecutive elections since 1996, but his victories have been marred by allegations of fraud, intimidation, violence, and human rights violations. He has faced increasing opposition from former allies, such as Kizza Besigye and Bobi Wine, who have challenged his legitimacy and popularity. He has been criticized for his authoritarian rule, his repression of civil society and media, his involvement in corruption scandals, his promotion of anti-gay legislation and policies, and his failure to address poverty, inequality, unemployment, and public health issues. He has also been accused of nepotism and favoritism towards his family members and ethnic group. He is married to Janet Museveni, who is also a politician and the current Minister of Education and Sports. They have 4 children, Muhuzi Kainerugaba, Natasha Karujaya, Patience Rwabwogo, and Diana Kamuntu. Who are Muven siblings? Museveni has 2 siblings, a brother and a sister. His brother is Caleb Akandwana, also known as Salim Saleh, who is a retired general and a presidential advisor on defense. His sister is Violet Kajubairi, who is a businesswoman and a politician. It is rumored that Museveni has blood relationship with Rwanda. What is the connection? Museveni is related to Rwanda in several ways. He is a former ally and mentor of Kagame, the current president of Rwanda. They both fought in the Ugandan Bush War and the Rwandan Civil War, and helped each other to overthrow the regimes of Amin and Habyarimana. Museveni also has some Rwandan ancestry, as he belongs to the Hema ethnic group, which is related to the Tutsi of Rwanda. However, Museveni's relations with Rwanda have also been strained by various factors, such as ideological differences, regional rivalries, border disputes, accusations of supporting rebel groups, and human rights violations. Museveni and Kagame have clashed over the role and influence of Uganda in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where they have backed different factions in the two Congo wars. They have also accused each other of harboring and sponsoring dissidents and armed groups that seek to destabilize their respective countries. In 2019, Rwanda closed its borders with Uganda, accusing it of arresting and torturing its citizens, and supporting a rebel group called Rwanda National Congress. The border closure affected trade, tourism, and movement of people between the two countries. In 2020, Museveni and Kagame signed a peace agreement in Angola, mediated by the presidents of Angola and Congo. They agreed to resume diplomatic relations, reopen the borders, release prisoners, and refrain from interfering in each other's affairs. However, the implementation of the agreement has been slow and uneven, and some issues remain unresolved. Recently, Museveni's son, Muhoozi Kainerugaba, who is also a senior army officer and a presidential advisor, has been involved in efforts to improve relations with Rwanda. He has visited Rwanda twice in 2022 and met with Kagame, whom he calls his uncle. His visits led to the reopening of the Katyuna border point in March 2022. He also invited Kagame to attend his birthday dinner in Uganda in April 2022. Where Museveni and Kagame exchanged warm greetings and expressed their commitment to peace and cooperation. How did Museveni capture Kampala? Museveni captured Kampala in January 1986 after a 5-year guerrilla war against the government of President Tito Okello, who had seized power in a military coup in July 1985. Museveni led the National Resistance Army, NRA, a rebel group that fought for political and social reforms in Uganda. The NRA launched a final offensive on Kampala on January 17, 1986, and faced resistance from the Ugandan National Liberation Army, UNLA, the government forces loyal to Okello. The NRA managed to overcome the UNLA's artillery and besiege several strategic locations in the city, including the Republic House, the UNLA headquarters. On January 26, 1986, the NRA captured Radio Uganda, the state broadcaster, and announced their victory. Okello fled to Sudan by helicopter, and Museveni was sworn in as president on January 29, 1986. How did Museveni differ with Joseph Kony? Museveni's dispute with Joseph Kony began in the mid-1980s, when Kony claimed to be a prophet and a spiritual leader of the Akali people, an ethnic group from northern Uganda that felt marginalized and oppressed by Museveni's government. Kony formed the Lord's Resistance Army, LRA, a rebel group that aimed to overthrow Museveni and establish a new government based on the Ten Commandments and Akali traditions. The LRA terrorized northern Uganda and neighboring countries with brutal attacks on civilians, killing, raping, mutilating, and abducting thousands of people, especially children. The LRA also received support from Sudan and Congo, which were hostile to Museveni's involvement in their internal conflicts. Museveni tried to defeat the LRA militarily several times, but failed to capture or kill Kony. He also engaged in peace talks with Kony, but they collapsed after Kony refused to sign a final agreement in 2008. In 2005, the International Criminal Court, ICC, issued an arrest warrant for Kony and 4 other LRA commanders for crimes against humanity and war crimes. Museveni vowed to cooperate with the ICC and bring Kony to justice. How did Museveni transform Uganda? After capturing power, after capturing Kampala in 1986, Museveni introduced some reforms that aimed to stabilize and develop Uganda. Some of these reforms included establishing a broad-based government that included representatives from different political parties, ethnic groups, and regions. He also created a National Resistance Council (NRC) as the legislative body and a National Resistance Movement (NRM) as the ruling party, restoring security and order in the country by disarming and demobilizing various rebel groups, militias, and bandits. He also reformed the army and the police, and created a system of local defense units (LDUs) to maintain peace at the grassroots level. Implementing economic reforms that liberalized the market, reduced inflation, increased exports, attracted foreign investment, and improved infrastructure. He also promoted agriculture, industry, tourism, and education as key sectors for development. He received support from international donors and institutions, such as the World Bank and the IMF, for his economic policies, promoting social services and welfare programs that improved health care, education, water supply, sanitation, and poverty reduction. He also initiated a successful campaign against HIV/AIDS, which reduced the prevalence of the disease from 15% in 1991 to 5% in 2001. Advocating for regional integration and cooperation with neighboring countries, such as Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, Sudan, and Congo. He supported the formation of the East African Community, EAC, and the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD. He also intervened in regional conflicts, such as the Rwandan genocide and the Congo Wars, to protect Uganda's interests and security. These reforms earned Museveni praise and respect from many Ugandans and the international community as a visionary leader and a reformer. However, some of these reforms also had negative consequences, such as human rights violations, corruption, nepotism, environmental degradation, inequality, and political repression. Museveni also changed the constitution several times to extend his stay in power and eliminate term limits and age limits for the presidency. He faced resistance and criticism from opposition parties, civil society groups, media outlets, and some of his former allies. What is the current state of the Ugandan economy? The current state of Uganda's economy is as follows. Uganda's economy grew by 5.3% in the fiscal year 2022-2023, recovering from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the weather-induced decline in agriculture. The growth was driven by the services sector, which contributed 42.6% to the GDP, followed by the industry sector with 26.1% and the agriculture sector with 24%. Uganda's inflation rate eased to 9.2% in February 2023, thanks to lower international commodity prices and the tight monetary policy of the Bank of Uganda, which maintained its policy rate at 10%. The exchange rate of the Ugandan shilling also remained stable against major currencies. Uganda's economic outlook is positive, with growth expected to accelerate to above 6% per year in the medium term, as the country prepares to become an oil producer in 2025. The investments and exports of oil will support the government's efforts to promote tourism, export diversification, and agro-industrialization. The government also plans to rely mainly on revenue collection and spending efficiencies to reduce the fiscal deficit. However, Uganda's economy also faces some challenges and risks, such as the slowdown of global growth, disruptions in global financial conditions, and increasingly volatile weather. The pace of poverty reduction has also decelerated, as most households depend on agriculture and are vulnerable to climate change and environmental shocks. The private sector investment has been crowded out by debt-financed public spending on physical infrastructure, which is not sustainable. The political and institutional framework has also weakened, with human rights violations, corruption, nepotism, and repression of civil society and media. What is the status of human rights under Museveni? The status of human rights and political freedom in Uganda is generally poor, according to the web search results. Uganda has been ruled by President Yoweri Museveni and his National Resistance Movement, NRM, since 1986, and they have maintained power through patronage, intimidation, and repression of opposition and dissent. The country has experienced serious human rights violations by the security forces, especially around the 2021 general elections, which were marred by violence, fraud, and internet shutdowns. the authorities have also restricted the rights to freedom of expression and assembly, as well as the activities of civil society organizations, media outlets, and online platforms. The government has also enacted laws that discriminate against and persecute sexual and gender minorities, such as the Anti-Homosexuality Bill of 2023. Some of the key developments in 2022 that illustrate the status of human rights and political freedom in Uganda are: in October, authorities established a new requirement for NGOs to register with the Personal Data Protection Office, providing organizations less than a month to complete the registration. The swiftness of the law, as well as the arbitrary nature of the requirement, is consistent with the tactics the government has used since 2019 to shut down civil society groups. The deadline was later extended until the end of November. Also in October, President Museveni announced new lockdown restrictions to curb the spread of an outbreak of Ebola. The government was initially hesitant to address the outbreak of the virus, which began in September, likely resulting in an increased number of deaths. In December 2021, Uganda sent Uganda People's Defense Force, UPDF, soldiers into Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, as part of a joint operation with the Congolese army in an assault on the Allied Democratic Forces, ADF, rebel group. The government claimed the ADF was responsible for the November 16, 2021, suicide bombings in Kampala that killed 4 people and wounded 37. UPDF soldiers and police in April killed at least 11 people as part of a disarmament operation that began in March. https On December 28, 2021, military officers broke into the home of government critic and satirical writer, Kaguta Rukirabashija, beat him, and took him to an unknown location where they detained him for 14 days. Police later charged Rukirabashija with offensive communication over earlier tweets critical of President Museveni and his son, Muhoozi Kainerugaba. On February 9, Rukirabashija fled Uganda to seek treatment for the injuries he sustained from beatings in detention. 2 days before he fled the country, a Kampala court turned down his application to have his passport returned. On February 22, a security official kicked freelance journalist, Lawrence Kaguta, as he covered an opposition protest in Kampala outside the home of Anita Among, the then Deputy Speaker of Parliament. Kaguta told the Committee to Protect Journalists, CPJ, he was forced into hiding and unable to work for days due to fear. He said he was tailed at an office at which he worked by unknown people suspected to be government security officers. On March 10, a group of armed police and military officers raided the offices of the Alternative Digitalk, an online television station, in Kampala, arrested 9 staff members, and confiscated their equipment. On March 15 and 16, 7 of the 9 were released on police bond, while Norman Tumumbaise and Farida Baikobere were remanded at Luz IRA prison, and later charged with cyberstalking and offensive communication to disturb the peace and quiet of the President of Uganda. The charges resulted from their sharing excerpts of Tumumbai's 2 books that are critical of President Museveni. In August 2023, the UN Human Rights Office in Uganda ceased operations after the government decided not to renew the host country agreement. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights said he remains committed to working in Uganda, in line with his global mandate. These developments show that Uganda faces serious challenges in upholding human rights and political freedom for its citizens. The government has been accused of violating its obligations under international and regional human rights treaties that it has ratified or signed. Some of these treaties include the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, ICESCR, the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, CAT, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, CRC, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, ACHPR, the Protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the Rights of Women in Africa, Maputo Protocol, the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, ACTEG. Wenyeji TV search results also indicate that there are some civil society organizations, media outlets, and human rights defenders that are working to promote and protect human rights and political freedom in Uganda, despite the risks and challenges they face. Some of these actors include the Citizens Coalition for Electoral Democracy in Uganda, KIDU, the Foundation for Human Rights Initiative, FHRI, the Human Rights Network for Journalists Uganda, HRNJU, the Chapter for Uganda, the Legal Aid Service Providers Network, LASPNet, the Uganda National NGO Forum, UNGOF, the Uganda Women's Network, UNIT. Every country in the world has its own challenges and Uganda is not an exception. We give credit where it's deserved, and put the record clear on all other issues. There are many positive things taking place in Uganda. There are many things we can tell about Ugandan President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, but this is a brief history.
Viewers, thank you for walking with us to the end of this journey. That is Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, the man who was ruled for 36 years, one of the longest serving heads of states in Africa. That is a brief history. There is much you can talk about this strong man from East Africa, but that is what we could afford for today. This is Wenyeji TV. I am JW. I want to thank you for walking us in this journey. Continue subscribing, sharing, and commenting on all the videos that we are going to be sharing with you. Thank you very much.
Wenyeji TV. Keep on watching, subscribe and share. This program is produced and directed by JW.
Here at Wenyeji TV, we are dedicated to bringing you in-depth coverage of the latest news, events, and stories from around the world. Our team of passionate journalists, reporters, and documentary filmmakers work tirelessly to provide you with accurate, unbiased, and thought-provoking content.